Hello, everyone. In this podcast, we will be discussing sensitive topics such as sexual assault. It's important to take care of yourself while listening. Some suggestions are listening while you're in a healthy headspace or knowing who you can reach out to if you become upset. Our 24/7 helpline for crisis calls based out of Central Florida is 407-500-HEAL. By contacting the national hotline at 1-800-656-4673, you can get support and learn about your local resources. There's always someone ready to help. Welcome to the Victim Service Center podcast. Here we sit down with professionals that serve survivors and victims of trauma or those who've experienced violence and have conversations about social issues. This week, we are talking about the Passion Flower Project. My name is Emilie Mitchell. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the education coordinator at the Victim Service Center of Central Florida. With me, I have two amazing people. So I have returning Stephen Wilson. So Stephen uses he, him pronouns and is a crisis counselor and victim advocate at Victim Service Center of Central Florida. Diversity, inclusivity, social justice, compassion, and respect are values he lives by and what you can expect when joining him for crisis counseling. He obtained a bachelor's and master's degree in social work from the University of Central Florida and continues to build upon his education and skills. He hopes that together they can rebuild and repair the traumas in their lives. Stephen also is the founder, and we'll talk more about it, of the Passion Flower Project and helps lead that facilitation as well. So Stephen, thank you so much for coming back onto the podcast.
Well, thank you, Emilie. It's great to be here.
Always happy to have you, and always happy to have you as well, Nicola Prichard. So Nicola uses she, her pronouns and graduated from the University of Florida with her Bachelor of Science in Psychology. She is one of VSC's advocacy interns and is currently a graduate student in the Master's of Social Work program at the University of Central Florida. In her first year at UCF, Nicola interned at Children's Advocacy Center Osceola, working with families of children who had experienced abuse. After graduating, she plans on working to become a licensed clinical social worker and intends to continue working with individuals who have experienced trauma. In her free time, Nicola likes to read, cook, and play the piano. So Nicola, thank you so much as well for coming back onto the podcast.
Thank you for having me on again.
I'm super excited to have this conversation with you both. Just as a very brief introduction, among the many free services that the VSC offers to survivors of trauma are support groups. So some include our men's group, our LGBTQ plus group, or Rainbow Resilience. We also have a DBT skills group. We have so many, but today we're going to chat specifically about the Passion Flower Project, which is our gardening group, and we'll learn more about that too. We are joined by the PFP's or Passion Flower Project's founder and facilitator, Stephen Wilson. And we're also joined by Nicola, who helped run the group, to chat about support groups and how they can benefit survivors in their healing. Winnie Palmer of Orlando Health's involvement with the PFP and what it means to have communities come together to support victims and survivors, and the impact the garden has had on the VSC and our clients. So with that, always love to start off with some definitions here. How would you define what a support group is?
I like to think of a support group as a shared safe space where members can come together with a shared goal of overcoming or coping with a specific problem.
Okay, so it sounds like it's survivors kind of coming together and maybe sharing certain experiences with each other and also kind of healing almost together. Is that what it sounds like?
Absolutely. So many of our groups are very specific in the type of trauma that they are helping to heal. For example, we have adults who were assaulted as children for a group. We have our African American and BIPOC group, our Hispanic group, our women's group that is offered virtually and in person, as well as DBT skills.
Awesome. Yeah. And I know that we'll be talking specifically about one. And Nicola, being someone who has experience outside of VSC as well, is that how you would define a support group?
Yeah, I think Stephen's definition was spot on. I like to think of it as like a little community, and all of the people in it can get something different out of it. And I just think it's a place to heal that's separate from your own individual journey. And I think that that's a really nice kind of community setting to do your healing in.
I'm so glad that you brought that up, because that is kind of my follow-up question to this, which is, what are some of the benefits that support groups can have on survivors?
Benefits of a support group can be very individualized and vary from person to person. Some of the benefits can include decreased feelings of isolation, loneliness, and judgment, and/or reduction in distress, depression, or anxiety. All of this is achieved while having the ability to feel safe and open and honest about your feelings while learning to cope with life's changes.
Yeah, I love that. I love that you brought up the word isolation, because I know that when we talk about survivors of trauma and specifically of sexual violence, that can be one of the many effects that trauma can have on someone. This idea of, if we don't talk about it with this shame around it, it's almost like, oh, this happened to me and I need to be quiet about it. But support groups can offer for some survivors that chance to remove that shame and go against that isolation and connect with other survivors. I know that we talk all the time about how trauma can have so many different effects, and we always want to normalize all those, where it can be physical, it could be psychological, and it can also be social. So I feel like support groups can help, that really normal response to trauma, which can be self-isolation. So I really appreciate you bringing that up, Stephen. Nicola, were there any other benefits that you wanted to bring up?
I like that you said something about normalizing, because that's kind of one of the benefits that I think of with support groups, is kind of this normalizing effect for the way that survivors may cope with the trauma. Because, there's shame about what happened, but there's also shame sometimes about the way that survivors might think or react to the trauma. And I think that hearing from other people that they have the same or similar experience in the way that they handle it can be very normalizing and make it feel less kind of stigmatized. And I think along with that, sometimes there's the sense of mutual aid. So kind of building that empathy and compassion for other members in the group, but also for yourself. I think, especially in this group, I've seen that a lot, is kind of in building compassion for others, you do build it for yourself because they're going through the same experience. So then now it's kind of that universal compassion in the group.
I love that. I love the way that you brought that up, as we're going to talk a little bit about it, but this idea of like, there can be vicarious trauma, but also vicarious healing, and then also compassion with another individual, and then kind of turning that inward and kind of becoming your own advocate. I think that that's so empowering, and also just really healing to hear about, honestly. I know that we talked a little bit about the different support groups that we offer at VSC, but I wanted to ask, what is the process of joining one, and who is actually eligible to join, specifically the Passion Flower Project?
Absolutely. So like we mentioned before, Victim Service Center offers a variety of support groups that cater to our different clientele demographics and needs. For example, due to COVID, we've made many of our support groups 100% virtual or have a virtual option. This has eliminated a lot of our potential barriers for clients, such as transportation issues. But we also offer 2 women's support groups, one in person, one virtually, a men's support group, a female, Black, and African American healing group, parenting as a survivor. Rise Above Children with Sexual Abuse, and Acceptance and Commitment Therapy and on Intersectionality, as well as the Rainbow Resilience and the Passion Flower Project. In order to be eligible for one of our support groups, you must be a current client of ours and be actively seeing a crisis counselor or a therapist. A potential member should not be in crisis, have the ability to receive feedback, and the willingness to explore the therapeutic process. If this sounds like a good fit and you are interested in one of our support groups, please contact your crisis counselor or your therapist.
That's so awesome. Yeah, I know that part of the intake process is just making sure that someone might be ready to be part of a support group. And we'll talk a little bit about that a little later for as far as maybe someone feeling a little nervous to join one. But essentially, what are those kind of reasons, Stephen, you brought up kind of, could it be triggering for a survivor possibly?
Absolutely. So someone who hasn't done a bit of processing of their own trauma, if they're in a support group that is specifically talking about sexual assault and that is one of your triggers and you're not able to speak about it or be around subject areas that surround sexual assault, that could be very triggering for some people. So part of the process of seeing a crisis counselor is learning to have those coping and grounding skills so that you are able to speak freely about your traumas and how you wish to heal them.
Awesome. Yeah, that's just always good to remember. And then we'll talk a little bit about how you can talk with your crisis counselor or someone about if you're feeling ready or if you're not sure, and how you can kind of get that those questions answered, really. So I'd like to dive in a little bit more about the Passion Flower Project. So can you tell me a little bit about this group that you lead?
So in its conception, the Passion Flower Project was mindfulness-based. Since then, we've kind of built upon those skills while still incorporating mindfulness skills. We're now also using CBT skills in the garden.
Oh, that's so awesome. So yeah, I know last time we had this conversation, we talked about how you use kind of metaphors of the garden and like use that as metaphors for healing. And it makes sense that a garden would have that as far as literal growth. I know that you also talked about like something that stuck with me was when you were talking about the way that healthy boundaries where you need space between flowers and other plants for them to thrive and grow. But now it seems like you're also incorporating CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy. So how do you kind of incorporate that?
So it's, in my mind, it was a natural progression building upon the garden's metaphors. But the new modality addresses negative thoughts rather than just being more mindful in the moment. So it takes mindfulness to the cognitive process.
I get it now. So it's kind of like bringing to consciousness these things and without shame or guilt, and then also challenging them and maybe reframing through these CBT skills. That's really awesome. And Nicola, I don't know if you want to jump in on the conversation too, how you've seen how CBT has been added to it, or kind of what is it like for you to help run the support group?
I love that this kind of took this direction into CBT. I think that CBT is a very interesting modality and it kind of lends itself well to this kind of group, especially paired with, the mindfulness aspect that Stephen was talking about. I think kind of the foundation of CBT is that aspect of neuroplasticity and kind of you can change the way that your brain thinks about things automatically. But at first it's not automatically, but I kind of like, that it's tied into this idea of a garden. And, in the first week we had like the weeds and we got rid of the weeds. And then I like to kind of think of that even with CBT is like, those are your negative thoughts and your negative beliefs about yourself. And you have to like work to take those away. And then you work to like add stuff to the garden. And I think that that's the combination of the two is very cool to me.
I love that. I love the way that you said that. And kind of while you were talking, I wrote down the word empowerment, because like having the power to affect change within your thought process and grow and change just as the garden is growing and changing as well. I don't know if you have specific CBT skills that you wanted to kind of highlight, and how they can apply these skills in their daily lives.
So one of the interventions that we covered in the Passion Flower project was the cognitive triangle. The cognitive triangle basically identifies a situation that then evokes a thought, which then gives a feeling, which then leads to our behaviors. If, say, the situation is like you're feeling anxious about a podcast or a presentation that you're going to do, right? You wake up that morning feeling dreadful, right? You think in your mind, this isn't going to go well. I'm going to mess up this or that. Then you get the feeling of that you're inadequate or that you're not going to do a good job. Then, because you've had these thoughts and these feelings of negative performance, you then get in front of the classroom or wherever you may be, and then you begin to stutter and you begin to doubt yourself and stumble upon yourself, even though you know the material inside and out. But because of the way that the situation prompted your thought, your feeling, and then your behavior, it started a spiral of negativity. We could still have that same thought, but we can choose how to react to it. So we still have that same situation, but we don't have to have that negative thought that then brings on the negative feeling and then the negative behavior. So if we can't change the situation, we can change the way that we react to it by changing the thought that precedes it.
I have to say, nip it in the bud in this moment because it's such a good gardening pun, but it's so true. I think that's super relatable to anyone listening, whether or not you're a trauma survivor or not. This cognitive triangle of, I love the way that you gave such a perfect example of it. And at the same time, I feel like when it comes to mindfulness, not judging ourselves for having these negative thoughts and remembering that we have the power to nip it in the bud or reframe it or something like that. Nicola, was there something you wanted to add onto this particular CBT skill or a different skill that you wanted to uplift?
So there's another skill that we use, which is a thought record. So it's kind of a very similar concept to the triangle. You write down the situation, you write down the thoughts and the feeling that you have. But then you take it a step further to look at the evidence for the negative thought, and then you come up with evidence against the negative thought, and then you come up with a more positive or a more fair assessment of the situation, and then you describe how you feel looking at the situation through that more positive or more fair lens. And in a way, it's a more compassionate lens, really. But what I like about both of these skills is at first, it's quite a formal process and a lot of it is worksheets and, practicing, and it takes a lot of everyday practice, but over time that becomes an automatic process for you. So when you see the situation, your brain automatically goes to the process of how can I look at this in a way that's more compassionate or more fair because you've done all of that practice and all of the worksheets.
I love that you brought in the word compassion again, and I can clearly see how group members of the PFP may talk about, they're like, oh, I was working on the thought record, and then maybe another support group member might come at it with that compassion for that person, and then reflect on themselves and be more compassionate about their thought processes and their journey too. So I love that. And with that, I wanted to kind of ask you where the idea to start this group actually came from, Stephen.
Gardening has always been a passion of mine since I was in the second grade. While I was in my BSW program, I recognized the healing properties of gardening and began working in my personal garden very mindfully. Once I was in my MSW internship at Victim Service Center, I had the opportunity to start the Passion Flower Project, and here we are 2 years later.
I can't believe it, honestly. It's so amazing. I remember, when it first started as well, and I love that you brought that passion. You said since the second grade, so was there like a story with that, like your first gardening experience?
So remember way back in the day when people would watch commercials and you would see something on TV, you would have to send them a check, and then 12 weeks later they would send you something. Well, there was a little gardening set that in the second grade I saved up my $5 a week to get, and that was my first gardening purchase in first garden.
Oh my gosh, like an infomercial kind of deal. I love
Yes.
that. That's so cute. So I love that you're able to kind of bring your passion. And that's really true for a lot of our interns and our advocates as well, when they're passionate about a particular population, or passionate about a type of therapy. They can create these support groups, and depending on, feedback from their clients, we're like, hey, I wish I had a support group that was like this. It's just really amazing to see all of the different diverse support groups that we offer. So thank you, Stephen, for bringing in and making this beautiful garden in the back of the VSC. Nicola, what made you want to get involved with this particular support group as an intern?
I cannot state enough how much I love this group and I love the idea, and I'm so glad that Stephen made this. Um, for me, what I love about it is kind of how holistic it is. Because yes, we're working on kind of the thoughts and there's that CBT aspect, but also just being outside can be so helpful for healing. And even, well, I mean, it's in the evening, but we do get a bit of sun before the sun goes down. But that can be so good for you, and that physical activity can be so helpful for your mental health. And so I think that I like that it's this kind of broad perspective approach to a support group. So it's not just, obviously any support group can be helpful and have benefits, but I like that it kind of has the addition of the mindfulness, and it has physical activity, and it has getting outside. And then there's, CBT, and then there's the community. So it's just very overall beneficial for the people that are part of our group. Um, so yeah, I love this group.
That's so amazing. I love that you brought that in, because yeah, absolutely. Now that you kind of paint a clear picture of it, there's so many different pieces to it that can be really healing. And we did a whole podcast episode on movement and mental health. So we do know that, movement can help with that. And then also just being outside, I think, can be really, really helpful. And I love that you brought up even the sun and, the community aspect of it as well. And then of course the CBT skills. So that's awesome. So thank you, Stephen, for creating this opportunity for our clients as well as our interns to share their passion with you. So I love all of that. And, as a nonprofit, kind of shifting the conversation a little bit, funding can, be an issue because all of our services are free. So I know that Winnie Palmer of Orlando Health found this project very important to our community. So can you chat a little bit about our partnership with them and their impact?
Absolutely. So first off, I would like to say without their partnership and their sponsorship, so many of the things that we've been able to do in the garden would not be possible. For example, we've been able to implement a bird bath for which birds and butterflies can come drink and bathe. We now have a bird feeder, which invites more birds to the garden area, as well as many plants that are homes and hosts for butterflies.
I love that. And of course, butterflies have that intrinsic metaphor of growth and transformation as well. But also I love that the idea that the community is also making like animals come part of it as well. So that's awesome. Yeah, I know that they also were able to bring more awareness to it too. So more survivors can be aware of this particular support group and things like that. Why is it important that community partners come together to help survivors heal, do you think?
I think as a community at whole, it's really important to support one another. When someone's boundaries have been violated, the way sexual assault survivors' boundaries have been violated, it's really, I find it to be comforting to know that not just one organization cares about the cause, but multiple organizations are there to support you throughout your healing journey.
Yeah, and I love that you said that, and it kind of brings back that holistic healing too, right? there's a lot of different moving parts, and the community kind of coming together and saying that this is an important issue and we're here to support you. And the idea that, we'll talk a little bit about it too, but how mental health can impact your physical health and vice versa. I think that sometimes, survivors may feel a little nervous to join a support group like the Passion Flower Project. So what would you say to a survivor who wants to join but is feeling a little nervous?
I think I would say to think of that aspect, that Stephen mentioned at the beginning of how isolating it is as an experience to be a survivor. And I think that feeling alone is a big part of the initial part of the healing process. And I think that support groups like this can be so helpful. And we've talked about normalizing different responses. And I think that that's a great place to kind of get that feeling of you're not alone and you're not handling things badly or handling things in the wrong way, because there is no wrong way. And I think, you don't have to go to a group and do the most. You can go and you can sit and take your time getting comfortable. No one's going to make you talk about something you don't want to talk about. And it's really a safe space to do as much or as little as you need to kind of get that sense of community and that healing. So I think I would just say, it's a risk. It can feel like a risk to go into that, because any situation where you have to be vulnerable with other people is a risk. But I think that it's one that has a lot of benefits and can be really helpful for survivors in their healing process.
I would also add that, as human beings, we do our best and most growth when we are in healthy, uncomfortable situations, right? Pushing ourselves outside of those boundaries of comfort.
Yeah, whenever I'm in a educational setting as an education coordinator, I like to talk about this concept of a brave space where people are feeling maybe they are in an uncomfortable situation. Maybe they're talking about topics that we're taught to not talk about, like race or, oppression or sexual assault. And it can feel uncomfortable to talk about, and at the same time, be a space for individuals to grow and learn about themselves and other people. And I love that you also brought up this concept of, you don't have to go and tell your whole story, right? You might not even want to say anything at first. I know we did a whole podcast on support groups in the past, and Savannah, who part of our speakers bureau, she brought up that it might take 2 or 3 times before you go, so before you decide hey, this is for me, or hey, this isn't for me. So it's okay to try it out, and then if you're feeling this isn't working for me, that's okay too. So I really appreciate you both kind of shedding light on that. So Stephen, what has this garden meant to you as you have seen it grow?
So as we've watched the gardens grow, we've also watched our clients grow with coping skills and grounding skills learned through CBT. This has actually been one of the most rewarding parts of it for me, is to see the results and the skills obtained by our clients.
How does it feel to start something at the VSC and then see it not only be here later, 2 years later, has grown just as your clients have grown, and now someone wants to sponsor it and has sponsored it? How does it feel?
To be honest, it's a bit mind-blowing. This all started off as a passion project, a way that I found for healing for myself that I wanted to share with others. And it's become so much larger than I ever expected or dreamed. And for that, I am totally grateful.
That's awesome. I think you should be incredibly proud. I know that even as someone who comes in as a staff member, I see it, and it's a physical manifestation of what we do here at the VSC, and what I'm proud of to be part of, honestly. So thank you, Stephen. Wanted to give you a shout out specifically. Nicola, how about you? How has it been impactful to you?
I think, the word that Stephen used, rewarding, is kind of sums it up. I think it's really great to see the growth in our group members and, every week kind of seeing those relationships build. And as much as we are facilitators, they are the ones who do the work for themselves and creating those relationships and practicing those skills outside of group, and then bringing what they can to the group each week. And so I think seeing that growth every single week is so rewarding. And also, as much as we're facilitators, we're also part of that little built community that we have. And we get to work in the garden with them, and I get to see them working in the garden together. And I think that it's really nice to feel like you were there to witness and be part of someone's healing journey, and it's a privilege to have that experience together.
I love that when you were talking, we talk a lot about the importance of recognizing vicarious trauma as healers. I had a long time ago for Victims Compensation Week, Victims Rights Week, I should say. And one of the guests brought up the concept of vicarious healing. And I can clearly see that in both of you, kind of as healers yourselves, you're also feeling that positive growth within your clients as well. So it's really nice to hear that it's impactful for you as well. And I love that you brought up that you're also part of this little community as well. Is there anything else? I think that's a great place to sign off, honestly. But is there anything else you'd like to bring up that we may not have covered? Anything you'd like to say to the survivors out there, or Winnie Palmer of Orlando Health? Anything?
I would just like to mention that Nicola and myself are presenting this group modality to the Florida Council Against Sexual Violence to hopefully go across the state. I would like to give everyone the opportunity, should they have the availability to support a support group at the Victim Service Center. If you would like to do so, you can go to victimservicecenter.org, click on the donation tab, and from there you can do a one-time donation or a recurring donation. If you would like to donate to a specific program or support group, please indicate so in the comments section.
That's awesome. I love that, whoever is listening can still be part of that community too, that you both have built. Nicola, anything you'd like to say as a final thought?
I think if you're thinking of trying out a support group, take the leap and try it out. And even if you go and it's not your thing, you don't have to continue. So it's worth trying and seeing what you can get out of it.
I love that. And I think that that's a great place to sign off. So thank you to the listener for listening to the Victim Service Center podcast. The VSC is a nonprofit organization that provides free confidential counseling services for victims and survivors of any kind of trauma in Central Florida. To learn more about our services, please visit victimservicecenter.org. And to everyone listening, healing is not linear and you are not alone. And thank you so much, Stephen and Nicola, for joining me today.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having me.